All right, I'm going to go ahead because I hate to keep people waiting when they've made an attempt to get here on time. I'm Caroline Brokaw Tucker. I'm a partner at Dunbar Educational Consultants based in New Canaan, Connecticut. I've been advising students and their families about college admissions since 2004. Before that, I was doing alumni interviewing for Princeton University for about 20 years. So I'm very happy you're joining us tonight in the second webinar that we've held since COVID-19 turned our lives and everything around the country inside out. I'd like to start off by introducing my fellow panelists tonight as we kick off this discussion about the options facing the class of 2020. I guess you could call this what we're doing tonight, to college or not to college. First, we have Allison Slater Tate, who joined Dunbar last year after establishing her career as a professional freelance writer. She's been covering parenting, education, and college admissions for NBC News, The Washington Post, Huffington Post, and Family Circle magazine. I believe that Allison is currently still writing for the Today Show. A fellow graduate of Princeton University, she's a member of the Independent Educational Consultants Association and visits several college campuses per year. She works in the college counseling office at her local public high school in Orlando, Florida, as well as other local schools' counseling offices, and makes frequent presentations to the community on college admissions and preparations. Welcome, Allison. Holly Bull is president of the Center for Interim Programs based in Princeton, New Jersey, a consulting firm specializing in assisting students and families develop gap year plans. You can imagine her business is pretty busy right now. She herself took a gap year before college when her father, who was also a headmaster, founded Interim in 1980, and another gap year after her sophomore year at UVA. In the 30 years she's worked at Interim, Holly has placed close to 3,000 students in programs worldwide. She's a master's from Harvard's Graduate School of Education, has served on the board of directors of the Gap Year Association, and presented at NACAC and JACAC. These are all admissions counseling groups, TACAC, PACA, IECA, and NAFSA, and been an annual keynote speaker since the nationwide USA Gap Year Fairs began in 2007. There is no one more knowledgeable on the topic of gap years, and we consider ourselves extremely fortunate to have Holly with us tonight. To start, let's take a quick overview here. A lot has changed for this year's seniors. From the Art and Science Group, which is a Baltimore-based consulting firm, we see the following. 1 out of 6 students who planned before coronavirus to be full-time students at a four-year institution no longer plan to do so. An additional 2/3 of students have some concern about being able to attend their first choice institution. In all, 12% of students who have already made a deposit reported they no longer plan to attend a four-year college full-time. And while many students who still plan to attend a four-year college full-time in the fall have already put down a deposit, as of April 24th, a few days ago, 40% had not made a deposit anywhere. Now, some of these decisions are clearly being driven by financial considerations, but many are also being driven by the uncertainty of what it's going to mean to start or return to college this fall. And that's sort of where we're starting right now. So let's talk about it. What are we hearing about whether or not colleges are going to be open for their students on campus this fall? Allison, do you want to kick off with what you've been hearing?
Yeah, so even in the last day, we've been getting reports or seeing letters that schools are putting out saying they are planning to try and to have students in person on their campuses in the fall. They are going to have to put in social distance guidelines. They're not necessarily listing what all of those will be. I think that there's definitely going to be modifications that even if the kids are there on campus, it's not going to look completely the same. There are other schools that are saying they're planning to be online. Not as many. I don't think they want to be as forthcoming about it yet because they would like the kids to commit and come. And I think that when it comes down to it, a lot of schools have said they're not going to know before mid-June, July 1st, mid-July. And unfortunately, most of the schools are going to want deposits before then. So
I think that's right. I mean, traditionally, the deposit date was May 1st. A certain number moved their deadlines back to June 1st. but still, and while the colleges who are saying they're planning to be open, they can absolutely plan to, but if a state has to close down,
Right.
doesn't really
Our
matter.
governor
Yeah,
shut that down.
they're going to have to shut that down. Social distancing on a college campus, I think that means more space within dorms. It means having dorm space where they can isolate kids who test positive. It means
Right.
needing to be able to test kids. I don't know how they're going to handle the dining halls. Will they even be operational? They may not
I
be.
mean, what I've heard about schools, actual, because we're covering this for the Today Show right now, is what will it look like when actual like high schools reopen. They're talking about not having cafeterias open, having students eat at their desks. I can't imagine that you can have large buffets in these dining halls open on college campuses if they're still worried about the virus and social distancing. I don't really know how all of that would work.
Well, and in
So,
terms of college sports,
Right.
I can't see teams practicing together in a locker room together. I don't know. And maybe that could happen, but if they compete, I don't see stadiums of kids there cheering
sitting
them
shoulder
on.
to shoulder. Yeah.
So
Yeah,
if they're going to compete to be televised, it could be for an empty stadium, possibly.
what I say to kids when they ask me is just imagine how much under control everything needs to be in order to imagine yourself sitting in a room shoulder to shoulder with other people with their, with all of that going on and somebody in front of you and somebody behind you. How under control we'd have to be and how far away we are from that right now. And I think it might, I've heard a lot of parents saying, well, it should vary by state, and some states don't have a lot of cases, and that's true. But you have to look at the numbers of international students and the fact that they can't control where these kids are coming from. They're coming from all over the world when they come onto a college campus, and then you can't make them stay there. Once they get there, they can go home, they can travel. So it just becomes a matter of liability. And I think that if you demand that you want the college to give you an answer right now, it's putting them on the spot where if they give you the safest answer, they're going to make it hard for you to commit to go there. And if they give you an answer that you want to hear, it might not actually be able to happen, just through no fault of their own. So
we've talked about some of the extremes. I mean, there's we're back on campus, there's we're totally online, but we're also hearing some other options. Some of the colleges have talked about possibly delaying a start, whether that's delaying into later in the fall, or possibly, I guess one other possibility we've heard is possibly starting in January and then running through next summer. But I do think there's some complications you could run into with that in terms of scheduling unions, your professors. I don't know that that's any more viable.
For the whole staff, like all the staff that a university employs to run the school while students live there, that aren't faculty, are you paying them for the whole fall semester while nobody's there? And how do you do that? And I feel like they're building the airplane while they fly it, and I don't know that they know right now what those answers are.
I don't think they actually do. I respect the colleges. UVM came out today with the video from their president basically saying we're going to be on campus. And I know Harvard is saying they're going to be on campus. Richmond is saying they're going to be on campus. And that, I think they're saying that to the best of their ability. That's their intention. There is a list being maintained by the Chronicle of Higher Education. I'm going to put that in our Q&A section right now for anybody who wants to try and check that out. They are updating that on a regular basis as to what admissions events are going on campus, whether deposit deadlines are changing or not, and what they're telling us about the fall, what their intentions are for the fall. So that's out there right now. So let's say, okay, so say a college says we're totally going to be online, and a student doesn't want to go to college in that fashion. I guess the natural thing is to want to take a gap year. And that's one of the reasons we have Holly here. But before you can just assume, you can't assume that if you deposit at a college, they are automatically going to grant you permission to take a gap year. I think one of the important things to know is that if you really think that you might want to do that, you need to make sure that you find out from the college where you would deposit what their policies are regarding gap years. Most of them have an application process. The deadline, I think for UVA, it's like a July 1st deadline, or has been, by which you would need to apply for a deferral. And then you would need to give them a plan, tell them what you intend to do with that time. I personally, I'd be interested in what you guys think. I think it'd be impossible for a college if 50% of the kids who would enroll next year, either as freshmen or returning students, say, well, I'd like a deferral. I don't think the colleges can grant all of those. I think they're going to have to cap them somehow. Does that resonate with both of you as well?
In theory, yes. I think that I've heard of a couple of schools who've said they won't. I think they're hoping that that won't come back to bite them. But
they're saying that they would they'll grant all the deferrals that are requested.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that they're trying to make their students happy that way. They're trying to say it'll be okay, whatever you want to do, we'll make it happen. But for most schools, financially, they have to be able to budget, and they have to be able to control that enrollment so that they know how much money they have, and they can run their school for next year.
Well, and I think it's very common for tuition to account for 40 to 50% of annual income for a college. Yeah. So I can see it be very difficult.
Yeah.
Unless they've got a huge, huge endowment. I think it'd be very difficult to continue operating if you didn't have that tuition. All right, so let's assume that a student could have a deferral and could plan a gap year. Holly, we're going to ask you, under these circumstances, what could a student do with a gap year?
Right. Okay. Thank you. One thing I want to just mention while I'm thinking about it is, and you all have mentioned this as well when we were chatting earlier, is I think the importance of when you ask for a deferral, that you talk about what you're going toward, not what you're going away from, so that rather than saying I want to take a gap year because of coronavirus, probably better to talk about, hey, here are the things I really want to get at. Right. And what I'm going to do right now is just give you some background on my perception or perspective on the gap year for so many years now. And first, just outline the benefits of gap time very quickly, the types of programs that are out there, now including another category, which are online options, and then look at how the gap year world is responding to this COVID-19 landscape. So as Caroline said, I'm speaking from a double bias here. I took 2 gap years, I had 2 marvelous years, one before, one during college, and I've been counseling. All I do is gap year counseling, and I've been counseling for 30 years now. So day in and day out, I'm working with students and families and programs. And for me as a counselor, the core value of this really is that you have an opportunity to choose and create your life. So even the students I'm interviewing right now, whether they take gap time or not, and this virus has actually forced people to think more consciously about making a choice. You don't just go to college. Some of them are thinking, do I want to face this particular landscape in college, or do I want to consider something different? One of my students said, I hadn't even thought about taking a gap year until I had to start thinking about it because of the coronavirus. And wow, I'm really excited about what I could do. He said, I know it sounds terrible, but I'm kind of grateful that it made me think about it. So even if you're picking and choosing online options, not like that's sort of the potential worst case scenario, we can't get out the door. So I've got online college classes, or I have online everything options. You're picking and choosing in that array of options and creating a curriculum in a sense that works for you. That is part of the gap year learning process, owning what you're up to. And so for me, that's core, and that's going to happen no matter what. I think with the students with whom I'm working this year, is they still are being much more conscious about what they're up to and rolling with changes and more actively and dynamically involved. And that's a life skill. This is very much a year on. People say, oh, I'm going to take a year off. Baloney. You have to be on when you're choosing and creating your life. And I think students are really excited about options. And so they tend to be Even if they're a little nervous, they're very much energetically on and really into the process of choosing what they're up to. There's a nice benefit here of just rest and rejuvenation. You know, not being in classes at all, not worrying about grades, not having so much packed in, and also getting a sense of the relevance of this learning to the world, you know, the relevance of your studies to the world. Students are often becoming more financially aware because they have to think about budgeting more. And on every level, you know, or they're, in a sense, you're front-loading skills. So you're building a resume on a practical level before you even hit college. And a number of these things, whether online or hands-on, are really different from sitting in a college classroom. I mean, basically high school and college aren't so very different. You're still going from class to class. You have to bring something fresh to the college table. And so I think the hands-on experiences really inform students' learning process, and they're bringing all of that into the college experience and beyond. So these things that students do also can help you get jobs post-college. You know, again, if you can get out into the world, even a half step out for part of a gap year, you're getting fluency or practice in how to take on the world and knowing you can handle yourself. Now, these are the benefits that I keep seeing over and over and over again. Also, if people worry about stepping away from academics for a full year, how are they going to handle going back into the classroom? You know, the data is showing, and anecdotally, I can tell you this is so, that gap year students' GPAs are higher. You know, they're better students. I hit the ground running when I went to college. I was really excited about learning. And I had much more of a hand in what I was up to, and I wasn't run by the mob. And that's personal power. You know, that's part of what you're developing with this kind of time.
Do you think it's also sort of a reflection of the maturity of having the time to step back and really think about what they want to pursue?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the core of it. You know, you're just like stepping back from what's cooked you up till now and saying, you know, what suits me? And you're in the soup of what defines you. Yeah. You don't know what the soup is, but it's like, okay, you know, and also there's a shift away from I have to do this, I'm supposed to do that, what will people think? You know, all the directives that come at us when we're young, right in through, you know, 20s, and sometimes for people in their 30s, 40s, and 50s, they were working from all these expectations from the outside in. With gap time, you're starting with this core pivot. You know, who am I? What am I interested in? Okay, let me trick all this stuff out and try all these different interests I have. And it's all about striking matches, not tending fires. You're going to learn from everything. You know, there's no downside in that regard. There are things you want to watch out for when you create gap time. You want enough going on. You want to land in placements that are well run. You know, you need to put some thought and care into it. But you are learning from everything. You don't have to be good at anything. You know, I had 3 months of modern Greek on my gap year, and I love speaking that language, and I don't speak it very well, but I love it more than the Greek and the German and the French and the Spanish I've studied. You know, it's just—
Holly, one of the things that I loved when I talked to you about your own story was that you thought you wanted to study marine biology, and you went to Hawaii and studied marine science, and then you decided, yeah, that—
There I am at 17 on my gap year.
Yeah, and you didn't end up wanting to study marine science. And I think that one of the things that I see with the high school seniors I work with is they think they know, maybe a lot of them think they know what they want to study. And then some of them have no idea, and that's terrifying. Right. And one of the things I love about a gap year is that you get the time to kind of test those things out without there being any stakes involved, you know?
Right. And that, again, I see over and over again. Finding out what you don't want to do, you know, not marine biology, is as equally helpful as figuring out, oh, wow, I want to be a surgeon. You know, I had a young woman go off, and 4 weeks is it. She was shadowing doctors in Asia and came back and told her parents, I don't think I'm going to be a surgeon. I will be a surgeon. So, you know, obviously it helps to do more of the hands-on. And I think the challenge right now is what's out there. So when I say program, there are 4 main categories plus this one extra one. The facilitated group programs. These are specifically set up for gap year students, 3 to 9 months. You're paying some overarching fee or tuition for these. They give you the most structure and support. And you could be doing cultural study and travel and service in different locations around the world with a group of peers, small group. You could be doing an outdoor adventure type experience. You could be doing studio art, art history, language immersion, but always with that built-in peer group and extra support. The next category are what I call skill-based intensives, 1 to 4 weeks, dropping into a wilderness EMT course, residential. These are usually with peers and older, so it's not just a peer group. and you're able to come away with a lot of information fast through this intensive course that you're doing. Cooking courses, learn how to run a recording studio, filmmaking courses, learn how to teach skiing, snowboarding, yoga, scuba diving, writing courses, you name it. And these are short and can be tucked into gap time very flexibly, and especially this year. A lot of this value of a gap year this year is buying time so that you could step into something very last minute as soon as things open up. And
so Holly, do you have any sense at this point as to how many of these gap year opportunities are going to be available, given sort of the climate that we're living in?
Yeah, and let me get to that question in a moment. It's a very good question. I just want to give people a sense of what is out there in the program landscape, because you also have, aside from the skill-based intensive, you have internships, 2 to 3 months, like 6 to 12 weeks, living in a city, shared apartments with fellow interns, domestic or abroad, and you can follow up on a particular area of interest. Do I want to be a journalist? Do I want to do business? Do I want to do environmental work, art galleries, whatever? Really useful. And then the last category is volunteer, most low-cost disaster relief work, working with animals, kids. There's a whole range of these things, all different ages, all different lengths of time, all over the world. And you don't have to bleed financially to have a great gap year, to do these things. Now, the last category are what I call the ORL, this online resource list. And we've been gathering these options since the end of February, beginning of March, when people had to come back early from their gap year experiences this past year. And these have actually worked really well. I mean, one young man was doing an entrepreneurial workshop in Asia, had to leave early, and he came back and finished it online. He said it worked fine. Another fellow wanted to go to England and do tutorials in World War II history and was all set to go, couldn't go. They set up an online tutorial one-on-one, not a big Zoom meeting or Google Meets, and he said it was fabulous. So you don't have to do classes. I mean, you can do courses, language classes, you've got technology, coding classes, arts-related things, skill-based intensives, internships, and volunteer options, fitness. These are all online. So if like in the worst case scenario, if you're looking at, okay, I've got to do online college classes and commit to a full semester, compare that to all these online everything that I can do week by week, month by month, buying time before I could potentially head out the door. And maybe I head out the door domestically right away, or maybe I can actually head out the door internationally. And so these options provide people incredible flexibility. The gap year programs themselves, especially the group programs, are all responding to what's going on this year in a number of different ways. So many of them are starting a little later. So rather than say a 3-month program this fall, it's going to be an 8-week program starting in October, not September. So they're buying time. Or if it's abroad, they've shortened the time frame, and they might also not be going to 2 or 3 different countries, one country. Many of these, they'll give you back your deposit, your tuition, money, everything you've paid if they can't run. If you can't do it in the fall, you do it in the spring. So you can also bump options. So gap time is always pretty flexible anyway. People are always adjusting when they do what. And that's the nimbleness and the benefit of the gap year options compared to potentially the college programs, especially online. You also have a number of these gap year group programs that are creating domestic programs. So if you're a student, you want to be with peers this fall, and you can actually do something in the States if you can't go abroad, there are more options that are going to be available here in the States.
So Holly, one question that came up that I think might be worth touching on just now is, one thing to consider is if a student says, well, I think I'm going to take some other college classes during this gap year, whether it's at a local college or online somewhere else, they do need to confirm with the college that they've deposited at that they can do that without turning themselves into a transfer student.
Right. I mean, colleges will often say, fine, we'll defer you, but don't garner credit somewhere else.
Exactly.
You can do something academic without garnering credit. So you can still do academic experiences on a gap year.
Yes.
And that's fine.
And do it without getting the credit for it.
But if you want to study something, most people aren't getting graded necessarily. By the way, you can also step away from academics for a full year. You're not going to forget how to learn. You're going to be fine. People
But
might be a little rusty.
for the families who are thinking, well, gee, I don't think I want to pay this sticker price for an online experience. So I'm going to do community college for a year. I'm going to take a gap year, defer for a year, take course at community college, and then go away to college. They need to make sure that that is okay with the college where they're
Right.
considering depositing.
Absolutely. Another aspect I think to gap year that's interesting, because you were talking, I think Allison, you were mentioning, colleges are like small cities. How do you control safety and health with so many people in this environment? Gap year programs are small. You're looking at 10 to 12 students and leaders in a lot of these placements that can be much more easily controlled. You know, if you want to go do an outdoor program, I'm sure some of these are going to be setting up something where, okay, we can screen you ahead of time. You're going to be with a small group and leaders, and you're going to be out in, you know, the boonies. You're not going to be around anybody. So it allows you to connect with a group, but not have to be with a huge group or even in a city somewhere. And that's what you're kind of waiting to see, what's available or where. You know, there may be some places in the world that are safer to be than the United States. So if you can get on a plane and go there and spend part of your gap time there, you know, that might make a lot of sense. I think.
Can you talk a little bit about, Holly, you and I have talked before about the programs that are cheaper or even free, or sometimes they give you housing, like the national parks, I think, have some programs, and there are places where you can volunteer and get housing in return. Because I think that when parents first hear the words gap year, they think like that's something that just rich people do, you know,
Right.
that affluent people can do that.
Yeah, thank you. And that's a great question, especially when people go to gap year fairs or they're looking online. And you don't have to do group programs. You know, those can run $15,000 for a semester, not including airfare. Probably a lot less right now, and many of them have scholarships. But if you look at options that can still connect you with a group, if they give you housing and food and you just have to get yourself there, they're going to be much less expensive. So whether it is something like disaster relief work, you know, for a week or longer, I can go help rebuild post-hurricane damage, tornado damage, earthquake damage, or bushfire damage, US or abroad, with a group of international volunteers in their teens and 20s, so built-in social life. You know, most people want some kind of a social life built in. They're not lonely. You're doing really wonderful work, and it's very low cost. Or you could be coaching kids in sports or helping in the classroom, you know, township school in South Africa. Or you might be going down to Central or South America and doing work hands-on, conservation-oriented, or working with animals. You could work at a wildlife sanctuary, sloth and, you know, small primates and reptiles and birds, sea turtle conservation work. Again, very hands-on. Those are things that you want to try and get at if you can, that don't have to cost a lot. And there are a number of those in the States: national park work, room and board. Even the skill-based intensives, the shorter skill-based intensives, they don't cost so very much. And if you're coming away with a certification, you know, you're really, that's part of your education. You're building your resume in a really powerful way, if you want to look at it that way.
So Holly, if somebody is not in a position to work with you, and we are going to put your website on at the end of this conversation, because obviously I think you're fabulous, and I've sent students to you in the past, and I think you're great. But not everybody, you can only work so many students,
Yep.
and not everybody can work with you. I know, you know, in real life, families could go to a gap year fair, and all these different opportunities would be there. I know there are virtual college fairs right now. Have you been seeing that there are virtual gap year fairs?
Well, unfortunately, the gap year fairs are done. They went from January through May. And so every year, January through May, they run throughout the United States, and those all ran, and I speak at a number of those. The Gap Year Association is a good resource because they're listing vetted programs. There's a lot of information there. They're just trying to gather information on all things gap year as a resource for students and for parents. So that's a good place to look. You know, go overseas. There's some of these, when you look online, you'll see large listings of resources. You have to do your own due diligence and do it. Ask, you know, look at reviews, ask to speak with alumni. It's always worth it to talk to somebody, if you can, who's been on a placement before. Most of the gap year counselors do free brainstorming sessions, and it's always worth it to do that. You know, part of our mission is just to educate people. So there's no obligation to work with us, but you'll get reassured, you'll get a better sense of what you potentially could do. And I think that's the first step. So yeah, so there are some nice resources out there. I don't know that there are any virtual gap year fairs going to be happening anytime soon, but that would be the Gap Year Association or Go Overseas.
And I would guess that if there was something happening, you would know about it because,
Yeah.
because of your
I
position.
mean, we're in a great position because a lot of programs are also letting us know what they're creating just because we've been doing this for so long. So
Or
there's,
they know
hey,
you.
Holly, we're going to start with online training and then we're going to do hands-on. What do you think? So, it's sort of back and forth as we all figure out how to make the best of, it's like these lemons that we have. What kind of lemonade can we make here?
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Well, thank you so much for going through all these options. This is terrific.
Yeah, you're more than welcome.
At the end, as we get to more Q&A, we may get more specific questions. Just to sort of jump back out to the 10,000-foot view of this all. Again, I think any of this year's seniors who are considering a gap year, make sure that the college where you would deposit will in fact give you a deferral, because I don't think all of them are going to be able to approve all the deferrals. So find out what the process would be. Think about a plan. If you need a little bit more time beyond that May 1st deadline, my guess is colleges right now are going to be very flexible. So if you were to say to them, I need another week or two to decide about this, my guess is they're going to give you that time.
I think it would be important, though, to say when you do ask for that, to tell them what your questions are. What is keeping you from wanting to commit? And can they, talk to you about those things? Like, what kinds of meetings are they having? What kinds of decisions are they making? What is their timeline? Because I think it's fair as a consumer to say, I'm having a hard time committing and deciding what I want to do. But let me tell you why, because this is a relationship that you're going to have with this institution, hopefully for 4 years, if not more. And they want to talk to you. I mean, they're in consumer affairs too. They want to convince you to come.
So one of the points that I think is important to make for a number of the people who are on this right now is one of the reasons that we don't see, yes, tuition is going to drive one of the factors that we believe is going to mean that colleges will want to limit how many deferrals they offer. The other factor they have to take into consideration is if they allow 25% of this year's class to defer, that's going to limit the number of spots that they have for next year's class, which is this year's juniors. So we're being asked a lot by people, do we think that that's going to become an issue for this year's juniors? Is it going to be more difficult for them as they're applying to more selective colleges? Will there be fewer spots? And I think the reality is, yes, there are probably going to be more deferrals this year than colleges are used to seeing. Even if they limit the numbers, they can't tell everybody that they can't defer. So there will probably be more deferrals this year than they normally see, which means that there are going to be slightly fewer spots for next year's juniors.
Yeah, and I have a daughter who's a junior, and I am really hoping she'll take a gap year after next year.
To get herself out of that fray.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, I can totally understand that.
Holly, so you usually recommend, right, that the students apply to colleges their senior year and accept somewhere before they take that gap year.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, as you probably know, Colorado College is one of the few colleges that they want to know if you're thinking about a gap year. You want to tell them because it'll help you get in. That's how highly they value their gap year students. But most colleges obviously want to get in and then ask for the deferral afterwards, after you're in.
And there are some colleges that historically have not, I mean, I believe the UC system historically has not allowed deferrals unless it was for a serious medical reason, for example.
And Wake Forest is another.
Interesting. They might change their policy for this.
I hope so. I've got a student who's wanting to defer there this year.
Yeah.
I said, you better check before you sign on with me if you can actually take a deferred year.
Exactly. Yeah. Another question that we've heard is, do we foresee colleges, the financial impact of losing tuition, of kids wanting to defer for a year or not go back to an online situation? Do we foresee that having a financial impact on colleges? And I'm afraid to say, I think the answer is yes. I think that the more highly selective colleges, which often have larger endowments, I think they'll be fine. I think a lot of the state universities will be fine, but I do think that some of the smaller private colleges with smaller endowments may end up having some trouble financially, and we will see some closing. In
One
terms
thing, I'm sorry, go ahead.
in terms of gauging their financial health, um, I know that Forbes has done a report on colleges' financial health that was last updated in November. I can put a link to that in the Q&A section if people are interested in that. Holly and Allison, do you have anything to add to those concerns?
Yeah, I have, well, one thing also, and you may have these articles, but that the blog on our homepage, the blog that I've been updating has a number of recent articles, Chronicle of Higher Education, all the Forbes ones, anything that we see is relevant, we're posting up there, as well as those 3 response scenarios that the Gap Year World is offering to, you know, this particular year. But one thing I wanted to bring up, and I think we had talked about this earlier, is, which I hadn't really thought about as much, is how many of the, not just the seniors going into college this year may or may not be going, but the students who are already there, how many of them are not wanting to do online classes again this fall? So not only are the colleges seeing just the freshmen maybe not wanting to come when their tuition dollars are going down, but their current students are saying, you know, I'm not sure I want to do this again until you can guarantee I'm going to be on campus.
Yeah, I actually have heard that state universities are in financial trouble because of what's gone down. I think that the impact of this spring shutting down very quickly in an emergency situation, and a lot of them have had to refund room and board, and a lot of them are facing, especially out-of-state students who don't want to come back in the fall if it's going to be online again, because they don't believe that out-of-state tuition is worth it if they're not going to be on the campus, which is, it's a lot of money. I think that a lot of schools, I mean, even Harvard, you know, had a hiring freeze and salary freeze, and they are looking at their finances very carefully, and they have a $40 billion endowment. But, you know, these colleges were not planning on this, just like everybody else. And I think it's definitely going to affect their financial health. I think that if you are looking at enrolling at a very small private college, you should definitely be having some conversations with them about their financial health. And I have had students ask me that question. I've talked to colleges and they've been able to give me their numbers and give me reassurances about their financial health. So they have those figures and they have those facts, and they should be able to give them to you if you ask them directly. And you shouldn't be afraid to ask them. That's their job, is to tell you what their financial standing is. I think, you know, we have a question about, do we think that it's likely that colleges would reduce their tuition if they go online in the fall again? I don't believe they can. Maybe they can try, but from what I know and from what I'm hearing, even though it's counterintuitive, it's costing colleges a lot of money to go online, and they don't actually have room in their budgets to give you a tuition break because they're going online. For them, it is still an expensive proposition. So I don't think that families should count on a reduction in tuition for fall. Yeah. So that's my financial there. I do think it might affect financial aid in terms of how much they have to give. I was on a webinar today with Dartmouth and the University of Texas and the Graduate School of Education at Harvard. And they said that they understand that financial aid will not look next year the way it looked this year. They do understand they have to be more flexible. And I think that the colleges that have the flexibility will be more flexible with financial aid and will be trying to help, especially, you know, in the past, merit aid and things like that have relied on test scores. And some of these kids might not have test scores. I don't think they know exactly how they're going to handle that, but I do know that they know that it's not business as usual. However, the schools that don't have the large endowments and can't be flexible with financial aid and might be really struggling, they might not have as much to give as they usually do. So, you know, it kind of all depends on which college you're talking about.
And to that point, I think I'm seeing a question to this effect as well. Does all of this then translate into thinking that we're going to see a lot more waitlist activity for this year's seniors? And we've been saying this ever since it hit, absolutely. But there are so many factors that come into play here. You have the international students who applied and hoped that they would be here in the fall, who will not be able to be here in the fall. You've got families' financial situations, very sadly, where they can't afford to go to the colleges that they really hope they would be able to go to. You've got students who don't want to go as far away from home as they thought they were going to. So we anticipate a lot of waitlist movement. Chicago started immediately. UVA and Notre Dame started moving last week. BC started moving yesterday. I believe I believe the Ivies aren't going to start until May 1st. And what happens when the Ivies move is that has a ripple down effect throughout all the other colleges. Once kids sort of move to the Ivies and that spot opens up, and then someone opens here, and then that spot opens up, and then it just keeps going on. So we do anticipate a lot of continuing waitlist movement. I would say well into the summer, because there's going to be, for all of these reasons, there's going to be a lot of what the colleges refer to as summer melt. Also based on the Justice Department's antitrust interactions with the colleges in the last year, colleges are no longer restricted from essentially trying to recruit students from each other. It used to be that there was an agreement with the colleges that once students had made a deposit and committed somewhere, other colleges would not try to recruit that student away. That's no longer the case. I have one student this year who is actually finishing his freshman year at one college, and a college that accepted him last year that he turned down has reached out to him and encouraged him to transfer. So we're going to be seeing a lot of that kind of activity as well. So a lot of stuff is up in the air. It's going to keep moving. Let me see. Let me take a quick look at my notes. Are there any other questions flowing through here that people
I
want
think
to answer?
this is a question I've gotten a lot, and somebody asked it tonight. If you ask for a gap year and your college grants it to you, can you change your mind later in the summer? Maybe if the college decides they can have you come on campus in person and then you want to go, can you change your mind and actually attend the campus? Will the school let you come after they've granted a deferral for a gap year?
I don't have any data on that because it doesn't normally happen, but this year is so up in the, I mean, maybe the colleges would like some of those students to come more last minute. I don't know. They could.
Yeah, I would think there'd be more flexibility this year than usual in that one, because they probably have the room. But I don't know.
And one thing I would say in general to families, you have every right to ask or request information, make requests about extending deadlines this year, and don't be afraid to do it.
Right.
And I do think the colleges want to be as flexible as possible. They want students, they want to answer questions. If you need more time, ask. The worst they can do is say no.
Right.
But students, should be approaching them. This is a place that you want to have a relationship with, and they want to have a relationship with you. So I would
students. That's their business. Like, this is the whole business, is to have students, and if they told you they want you to come, if they admitted you, they want you there. So
yeah, exactly.
They want you.
Holly, I do want to quickly, I'm going to share my screen in a minute and take people to, actually, you know what, why don't you go ahead and share your screen and take people through your website and show them, for example, where your blog is and where some of the most relevant pieces of information are.
Hold on, let me just pull up.
Also, a question for you, Holly, that you might be able to answer without concentrating too hard. Is it typical, or is it possible to take gap semesters instead of full years at most colleges? I know at our alma mater, Princeton, you take a year off or nothing at all.
Yeah, I mean, there are some of the universities like Middlebury, the Feb admits, Hamilton, the Jan admits. That's where we work with people for just a semester. Mm-hmm. So typically the gap year before college is a full year. When you're in college and if you want to take a break, that's where you can step away for a semester or a full year, more easily. Sorry, I'm just trying to pull this up.
What about the state schools like Michigan or UVA? Do they do it by semester? I don't
think so. Not from my.
Okay.
Not from my experience. Sorry, I'm having difficulty pulling up my.
While you're doing that, someone asked, will they give a discount on room and board, even if they don't give a discount on tuition? I would think that if students are not on campus, that they will not be charging room and board, but I would think that they gave refunds for room and board when they sent students home. So yeah. I would assume that they would at least be giving an incredibly deep discount if you're not actually living there. But I would think that they would just be paying, or just be asking you to pay for tuition. So.
If just to make this easier, if people just go to interimprograms.com.
Here we go. I'll go ahead.
Just put it up there. Sorry, it's
no problem. I'm going to share my screen here. Oh wait.
I want to ask, what if you pay a deposit to one school and then you get a better offer financially later in the summer from another school? Can you walk away from a deposit, or is this a breach of contract? How do you find the fine print? You can walk away. It's you're not going to get your deposit back. So, you know, and it's, you're breaking a contract with that college. So you better hope that you have a college to go to, which they are offering in your situation for you to go to it. So yes, you can do that. That's what
and it is understood. That's why colleges, you know, account for what they call summer melt. It is understood that that could happen. It is more likely to happen after the Department of Justice rulings. So yes, that you can certainly do that. Great, Holly. There's Holly's website.
Okay, so really, this is the homepage, and here's the blog that I was talking about. That we're just keeping updated. There's a lot of information here: sample programs, the benefits. You know, the Q&A, probably more than you want, lots of media information. And then the way that we work, just this free brainstorming session. So feel free to browse around. Let me know if anyone has questions. You know, again, we're here to help. You don't have to work with us to get questions answered. The only thing we don't do is just give away free program information or online options that we've been collecting. That's a lot of the value of what people are paying us for. But we do usually outline a fair amount before people commit to working with us. And we have scholarships for our fee. You know, we'll help anyone who needs help.
That's great. That's terrific.
Okay, I'm going to stop my share.
Okay, I think what I might do is take people to our website to show them the various resources that we've put available.
While you do that, I have a question for you, Holly, because I've had a couple of kids ask me this. This is an election year.
Yep.
So there should be a lot of, and also just from I've interviewed you before for a story. So I wanted to, for parents who've never thought about gap years before, students who have never thought about gap years before, one thing that I learned from you was that when you're putting together a gap year, you're really looking at from like September through May, not like the whole summer before and the whole summer after. You're really looking at 9 months, right? Right.
Yeah, this is kind of a sample, and there's lots of flexibility. So people can do, you know, they can do their own, people can do pretty much anything. I mean, if you want to make sure you just have enough going on during the year,
Right.
so you don't have too many gaps during your gap year. And
Right.
then in terms of, you know, this year as an election year, a number of students are looking at supporting a candidate or getting out and doing that. Now it's hard to get out and about, but you can do some of that online or on the phone.
I think a lot of that is going to be online and by telephone this year. Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Card writing and things like that. Like there are a lot of ways to get involved with campaigns from home, in a COVID-friendly way.
I think the challenge, especially this year, is how do I create a good schedule for myself so I just don't lapse into a funk at home? And I think this is what we're seeing with a lot of students who are in online classes finishing high school, which is not very exciting anyway. Mm-hmm. And these aren't classes, maybe you're just going to tired of singing in class. So unfortunately, they're assuming that anything online will be like that. And that's a pity, because it doesn't have to be like that.
Well, and I think that actually brings up a good point, which is it may not be fair to judge the colleges on what they've provided this spring, because literally people were throwing things together, people who don't know how to do this online learning, remote teaching, throwing things together as they raced out the door and slammed it behind them. And what I hope is that with feedback from their students, a number of colleges who perhaps have had less than scintillating results with online learning will spend the time this summer, invest time to actually figure out, how do we make online learning work? How do we make smaller groups work? How do we help our students get the best of what college is meant to do, which is to bring people from all different backgrounds and perspectives together? How do we do that online? How do we help to foster relationships and a sharing of minds. So I think over the summer, hopefully some of those places will have an opportunity to learn from the places who actually have been doing this. All right, here we go. I'm going to share my screen here so that we can show people, and I will put our address in. Here we go. So this is when you go to the Dunbar Consultants page, this is what you see. Here we all are. Here's Allison and me and the rest of our fabulous team, who are all wonderful, several of whom are listening on tonight and have been helping us out in the Q&A. If you move over here, right, you just scroll on down. This is where we put our announcements of things that are going on. And this middle section is our resources page, COVID-19 resources page. We've got a series of links here with all kinds of information. We've got links to the testing agencies, the College Board and the ACT, to their update pages. Also the International Baccalaureate. We've got a list here from Fair Test of the colleges that are test optional. As I'm sure anyone who's got a junior knows, so many colleges, knowing that kids can't actually test, have been going test optional, even if only for next year. This is an update from the National Association of College Admissions Counseling, collecting information on changes in admissions events, etc. We've got links to virtual campus tours here, although we do recommend going to the ones specifically hosted by the colleges on their own websites. We've got links for all kinds of academic and non-academic activities and opportunities. We've got our Dunbar reading list for high school students. Actually, anybody who likes to read could find those interesting. Links to our favorite blogs from admissions offices, Rick Clark at Georgia Tech, Chris Peterson at MIT, Dean Jay at UVA, and Jeff Schiffman at Tulane, all excellent information. Links to our own webinars, our newsletters, and our Facebook page. Within the newsletters, we've been throwing these out 1 or 2 a week since this all started. So anyways, that's what's going on the Dunbar website. I'm going to stop sharing and I'll go ahead and share that link in the Q&A section. And let's take a look and see if there are any final questions that we should answer.
Somebody asked for the Forbes article on financial health. We have that.
I think I posted that in the Q&A already.
All right. Holly, one thing that I always ask every college when they come to visit our school, and I'm trying to find out more about it, is what kind of student thrives at your college? So one thing I wanted, to ask you to articulate is what kind of student thrives in a gap year the best?
That's a great question. And one of the issues with this particular year, because the only reason I've ever heard anybody give me not to do a gap year is if they're not interested. Mm-hmm. So if you have students who are suddenly feeling like, I might have to take a gap year, I don't really want to, I'd rather be on a campus this fall. Right. That's a tough one. They have to turn toward it. You know, and I've been watching students struggle with that decision. Some of them, like a young man I mentioned, have said, wow, I never thought I could do all these things. I didn't realize what I could do. This is great. So he turned toward it. That's what you're looking for. But if somebody is really struggling, it's hard if you've got one foot in the gap year and one foot in college mentally, for it to be, I think, ideally a full success. So it requires more of people. You know, I think college in some ways is a no-brainer. You know the drill really well with academics already. You know, you're away from home, a little more independent if you can go on campus, but you're not in such a very different environment, and it's all laid out for you. Gap time is really varied. You know, gap time is this. I like this image. You know, we have our plan, but this is your life experience. You know, it's all the ups and downs and things that you're dealing with and the challenges you're facing. There's also the richness of your life experience, but not everybody is up for taking that on. And they usually know pretty quickly if they are or not. Because
and if someone says, my kid's really immature, I don't think they're ready for that. What you've said to me is that this is actually a great way for kids to get maturity before they go to a college campus and perhaps make choices that are not the best, right?
I think that's really important. So if you have this very immature student, and I'll talk about one in a moment here, if they're excited about the gap time, what's great is they're going towards something they want to do, so they're going to own it more. Mm-hmm. And you're going to see instant maturity as soon as they step away from the familiar. You know, I had a young man who went off, was very bright, very immature, went off and did a program in Asia in the fall with a group, almost got booted off the program because he was breaking rules. And they hung in there with him. He hung in there with them. Then he lands in Barcelona to do an internship with a computer marketing company. And in 5 days, they said, this is not an intern. This is a colleague. You know, Devin caught fire because he's being treated as an adult. He likes the business world. He stepped up. And I think we infantilize our teenagers terribly in this culture. We do not give them credit that they can take on way more than we realize. And we only see them often through this lens of them in school, which not everybody is enjoying that much, or they're tired of it. So, you know,
some of them can really thrive in a different environment where they are asked to step up.
And it's tough for parents, you know, they're seeing this immature son who's not initiating his life. Well, how does he initiate when he's doing things he wants to do? That's a different picture, you know. Or if you have students with learning differences, by the way, it's great to take gap time. You can hyper focus really well on things, single pointed focus. I'm going to do my wilderness EMT, now I'm going to do my internship, now I'm going to go do, you know, my disaster relief work. And it's not all this stuff coming at you. Another benefit.
We have a couple of questions here. This one really is for Holly. Do you know of volunteer or community work opportunities similar to those of gap years for students that they could do in their summer between junior and senior year? So are any of those gap year opportunities actually also available as summer opportunities?
There's a clunker with age. So the group programs will take you at 17. A lot of the others won't take you until you're 18 just because of liability. So it's nothing to do with your maturity level. It's just liability. And so when I have students who are 17, like I was 17 halfway through my gap year, you know, less is available until you can step into the more independent placements after that. So it makes it a little tougher if you want like the low cost disaster relief work, working in a national park. Harder to find unless it's a group program that's created that for you with the leaders.
Okay.
That makes sense?
It does. It does. Allison, here's a question I'm going to throw to you. Is it true that some colleges accepted more students' regular decision in anticipation that fewer students would deposit? And what would this mean for wait lists? Did you hear that?
I did not hear that. And I saw that question earlier. I think that that's how they're using wait lists. I think that they probably have bigger wait lists this year. I mean, colleges have been trending towards bigger wait lists for a while. But I think that this year, with the timing of the way things were going down.
I don't think they had time really to change the size of their regular decision pool. No, I agree with you.
Yeah. And I don't think that when you think back to the beginning of March or to February, we had no clue that we would be thinking about not being on a college campus by fall. So I don't think they had the chance to strategize that much. I do want to say, you know, as the mother of a senior, I think that gap year programs are amazing and such great experiences. I think that what I would want to reiterate to parents is what Holly said at the beginning. I think that if you are going to do a gap year program, you really do need to be running towards something and not making that decision out of fear. From what I am seeing from the colleges and from the point of view of being a parent and having gone to college, I believe that if your child decides they are going to stick with going in the fall, as my own has decided, whether I think it's right or not, they will be okay. It's not going to be horrible. This isn't forever. College is 4 years long. So they can always decide after this year to take a gap year sometime in the middle of college. And Holly has said that is very useful for her and it's been useful for other students. But also, I just kind of look at this as a writer, as from the point of view of this is part of their story, and there have been college classes since the beginning of time, like who've gone through world wars or have had things happen to them. I told Caroline, my own father's senior spring of college was canceled by the Vietnam War and by protests, and you know, it's just part of his legend now and part of his lore. And he doesn't sit around and bemoan like all the things he missed out of senior spring. That's not really his attitude anyway in life. But I think that if your child decides they don't want to take time off, they do want to forge ahead, they want to stick with whatever this college is going to come up with, I think that the right thing to do is to pick the college that you love and you want to commit to for these 4 years and as an alum for the rest of your life. and to decide if you're going to take the fall and spring, in most cases, the whole year off or not. But if you do go, it will be okay, and you will form a community, and this will be part of your shared story that you had this screwed up way of entering the whole college world. But, you know, it will happen eventually. And I think that we can't look at it as if they go in the fall, it's going to be horrible and this is going to ruin their whole college experience. It's temporary. So I think it's important to think of that.
And it will not, I don't think there's any way it's going to define their entire 4-year experience there.
Yeah.
And I think to a certain extent, and I do absolutely appreciate people's financial concerns here and what are they paying for. But I also think we have to look at the fact that we've been asking colleges for decades to be businesses. And if we want them to be around, we need to invest with them. I think a lot of us are trying to invest in local businesses, for example, so that they'll be around when this is over. If we want these colleges to be around for our students when this is over, unless it's going to be truly detrimental to a specific student to be online or to start in a campus that just is not going to be what traditionally it has been, and hopefully largely will go back to being. I think it's worth committing to becoming part of that campus community. Anyways, thank you so much, Holly. Thank you for joining us tonight. You are such an amazing resource.
Holly, she is the best.
Absolutely. There is no one who knows anything more about gap years than Holly does. And we appreciate all of you who joined us tonight. Please feel free to send us additional questions. If you have other topics of things that you would like us to address in future webinars, you know where to reach us, info@dunbarconsultants.com. Thank you so much. Stay safe, everybody, and good night.